I bet you didn't know these 17 forbidden places in Maryland. Maryland looks like any other mid-Atlantic state. Suburbs, crab shacks, the inner harbor. But hidden across its 12,000 square miles are 17 places you are legally forbidden from entering. And here is what makes Maryland different from every other state with abandoned buildings and old forts. Some of these places are not abandoned at all. They are fully operational right now. An underground Pentagon carved into a mountain with room for 3,000 people, labs handling the deadliest pathogens on Earth that were just shut down over safety failures, and an island in the Chesapeake so covered in unexploded bombs that even the Army will not set foot on it. And those are just the first 3. What you are about to see falls into 3 worlds: sites the government does not want you near, institutions that became nightmares, and places the Earth itself is erasing. Let's start with the places that are forbidden because the people inside them do not officially exist. There is a second Pentagon in America and most people have never heard of it. The Raven Rock Mountain Complex, known as Site R, sits on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border, hollowed out of solid granite. 700,000 square feet of underground space. Multi-story office buildings buried inside rock. The complex has been online since 1954, designed so that thousands of military and civilian leaders can continue running the country if Washington is destroyed. It sits right off a rural highway surrounded by farmland and small towns. There is no sign, no acknowledgement, just a road that disappears into a mountainside. Commuters drive past it without a second glance. The backup capital of the United States hides behind a tree line in rural Maryland. If the military has an underground backup capital, it makes sense that the president has a secret retreat nearby, and he does. Hikers in Catoctin Mountain Park can unknowingly walk within a few hundred meters of Camp David, but the retreat is scrubbed from every official park map. It covers somewhere between 125 and 200 acres of maximum security compound, completely invisible from the trail. Eisenhower renamed it in 1953, swapping Roosevelt's whimsical Shangri-La for the name of his grandson. The compound has hosted some of the most consequential diplomatic negotiations of the last 70 years, and yet there is no marker, no overlook, no plaque. You could hike the park 100 times and never know it was there. But while Camp David hides by being remote, the NSA hides by being enormous and in plain sight. Fort Meade is a 300-acre campus employing more than 20,000 people, with its own parkway exit labeled NSA Employees Only. You can literally drive past the largest signals intelligence operation in the world on your morning commute, and there is no formal way for a civilian to set foot inside. The parking lots alone stretch for acres. The buildings are massive, windowless, and utterly unmarked. It is the opposite of secrecy as most people imagine it. There is no hidden bunker, no unmarked door. The entire campus sits in broad daylight, surrounded by Maryland suburbs, and yet it remains one of the most restricted facilities on Earth. 3 sites, an underground bunker, an invisible retreat, and a massive campus hiding in plain sight. Together they make Maryland the backstage of American power. But those 3 are forbidden because of what is inside them. The next cluster is forbidden because of what could get out, or what could blow up. Fort Detrick sits in Frederick, Maryland, a town with breweries and antique shops and a weekend farmers market. It is also where the United States ran its biological weapons program. Today, the base houses BSL-3 and BSL-4 laboratories, the highest biosafety levels that exist, working with the deadliest pathogens on Earth: Ebola, anthrax, engineered viruses, capable of things most people do not want to think about. In 2025, the lab was ordered into a safety stand-down after internal breaches. Officials cited national security when asked what went wrong. The details remain classified. The breweries are still open. The labs are still there. The fence between them is surprisingly ordinary. If the government tests bioweapons in Maryland, it makes sense they also test conventional weapons here, and they do across multiple sites. Aberdeen Proving Ground has been a weapons testing range since 1917, sprawling across tens of thousands of acres along the upper Chesapeake Bay. But the truly forbidden piece is not the mainland range. It is Pools Island, a 280-acre island in the middle of the bay used for live bombing practice from 1918 through the 1960s. Today, the island has a beautiful historic lighthouse, one of the oldest on the Chesapeake. Nobody can visit it because the ground is still blanketed in unexploded ordnance, bombs, shells, and munitions fragments scattered across the soil and buried just beneath it. The Army confirms they are there. They just cannot guarantee they have found them all. A gorgeous lighthouse on an island no one can walk across. That is Pools Island. And Aberdeen is not even the only weapons zone. Patuxent River Naval Air Station is the Navy's East Coast Aircraft Test Hub, with restricted airspace stretching over thousands of acres of southern Maryland. In Indian Head, on a closed peninsula along the Potomac, is the Department of Defense's largest full-spectrum explosives facility. They develop and test propellants, warheads, and energetics on a campus the public can never enter. That is 4 separate weapons-related forbidden zones in a single state: bioweapons, conventional munitions, aircraft testing, and explosives development, all within an hour or two of the nation's capital. So far, every place we have covered is forbidden because the government is actively using it. But now we cross into a different kind of forbidden, places the government abandoned, where what they left behind is worse than what they built. Glendale Hospital opened in 1934 as a tuberculosis sanatorium, 216 acres, 23 buildings, miles of underground tunnels connecting the wards. Patients came to heal, some did, many did not. When TB treatment evolved and the patient population dwindled, the complex was condemned in the early 1980s over structural collapse and asbestos contamination. The tunnels are pitch dark, lined with rusted pipes and shattered glass. Ceiling tiles hang from exposed frameworks. Rotting furniture sits in rooms no one has entered in decades. But here is what makes Glendale unusual among abandoned hospitals. The entire complex is actively patrolled by Prince George's County Police and Park Police who live on site. This is not casual keep out signage. It is an actively guarded ruin, one of the largest condemned hospital complexes in the eastern United States. They station officers there around the clock because people will not stop trying to get in. But Glendale was just neglected. Forest Haven was something far worse. When Forest Haven opened in 1925 in Laurel, Maryland, it was marketed as a progressive model for caring for people with intellectual disabilities. The brochures promised fresh air, open space, compassionate treatment. For a time, it may have even delivered on some of those promises. But by the 1970s, the reality inside those walls had become a nightmare. Families sued over horrific abuse and neglect. Patients died from conditions that never should have killed them, infections left untreated, injuries ignored, basic needs unmet for days at a time. Staffing collapsed, oversight vanished. The institution that had promised dignity delivered suffering on an industrial scale. When the facility finally closed on October 14, 1991, investigators found something that reframed the entire history of the place. Behind the main buildings, in a wooded area most visitors never saw, there was a burial field. A memorial headstone acknowledges 389 people in a mass grave, but the true number is likely higher because records were incomplete and some identities were simply lost. People lived and died inside those walls, and no one recorded their names. Today, erosion has reportedly exposed bones from shallow graves. The buildings are peeling, graffiti-covered shells where medical equipment, beds, and patient files still molder inside. The site is monitored by U.S. Park Police. Entry is prohibited and regularly enforced. The pattern repeated not far away. Henryton State Hospital opened in 1918 as a tuberculosis sanatorium specifically for African Americans during the era of segregation. It later became a state hospital housing up to 400 patients, closed in 1985, and became so overrun by trespassers and vandals that the state eventually demolished the entire complex in 2013. They did not just fence it off, they erased the building from existence. When abandonment gets bad enough, sometimes the only solution is to remove the evidence that anything was ever there. Forest Haven and Henryton were forbidden because of what happened to the people inside. But the next 3 places are forbidden because of what happened to the buildings themselves. and the legends that grew in their absence. St. Mary's College Seminary, locals call it Hell House, was a 19th century Catholic seminary perched on a cliff over the Patapsco River in Ilchester. It burned. What remains are vandalized altar stones, crumbling foundations, and walls wrapped in decades of satanic legends that have nothing to do with the building's actual history. The ruins sit on state park land, technically accessible but permanently fenced and posted. The legends say more about the people telling them than about anything that ever happened inside. But if Hell House is a ruin wrapped in myth, Fort Carroll is a ruin wrapped in birds. It is a hexagonal Civil War-era sea fort built on an artificial island in the Patapsco River, designed under the supervision of Robert E. Lee before the war began. The fort never saw combat. It was never finished. Today it is privately owned, structurally collapsing, its casemates choked with vegetation and bird guano, standing water ankle-deep in the corridors. You can see it from shore, a strange geometric shape rising from the water, but landing on it is trespassing on dangerous private property. The birds have it now, and they are not giving it back. Not every forbidden ruin has a dramatic backstory. Winterbourne Mansion is an 1884 Victorian lake house in Boyds, Maryland that simply stopped. The owner died in 2004. Classic cars rust in the yard. Personal belongings sit inside exactly where they were left. The estate is stuck in legal and financial limbo, frozen in a moment that keeps receding further into the past. It looks like a movie set where a family walked away mid-scene, and it is ringed with private property / no trespassing signs. No legend, no scandal, just time, doing what time does when no one intervenes. Every place so far was forbidden because of something humans did, classified it, condemned it, fenced it off. But the last group is different. These places are forbidden because the earth itself decided humans do not belong there anymore. In the late 1800s, there was an operating gold mine near Great Falls, Maryland, shafts plunging over 200 feet into the earth. Real gold, pulled from real rock just outside the nation's capital. Today, stone foundations sit behind chain-link fences, moss-covered walls barely visible through dense woods, shaft entrances sealed by the National Park Service. The NPS now markets the real gold as the trail views, not anything you could actually dig up. The mine is gone. The danger remains. The shafts are still down there and the fences exist because falling into one would be the last thing you ever did. But at least the gold mine ruins are stable. Daniels was a living mill village on the Patapsco River. About 90 families called it home. In 1968, the property owner ordered everyone out. Then tropical storm. Agnes hit in June of 1972 and destroyed what was left. The river rose, the buildings collapsed, and an entire community was wiped from the landscape in a single night. Today, graffiti-tagged church foundations, half-buried car bodies, and chunks of old bridge abutments sit just off popular hiking trails. On foggy mornings, you can walk right through a ghost town without realizing what is under the leaves beneath your feet. If a river can erase a town in one storm, imagine what a rising bay can do over a century. Holland Island once supported more than 360 residents and about 60 houses, a real Chesapeake Bay fishing community with a school, a store, and a post office. But the island has been eroding for decades. House by house, the land disappeared into the water. The last remaining Victorian home, built around 1888, stood alone on the edge of nothing, looking like it was floating at high tide until it finally collapsed into the bay during a storm in 2010. The community was not abandoned. It was unmade by the water, acre by acre, until there was nothing left to stand on. The Chesapeake did not care what had been built there. It just kept rising. While Holland Island lost everything to the water, one last forbidden place in Maryland did the opposite. It froze. The Klotz Throwing Company in Lonaconing was a silk mill that operated from 1901 to 1957. When the workers left for the last time, nobody came to clear the building. The machinery stayed in place. Tools remained on workbenches. Spools of thread sat where they were set down. The mill is typically closed to the public, accessible only during rare, tightly controlled photo tours because the floors are dangerous and the decay is advancing year by year. It is a time capsule, not of ruin, but of a single ordinary workday that never ended. The workers walked out and the building kept waiting for them to come back. They never did. Pull back and look at the full picture. Maryland is one of the smallest states in America, but it holds an underground Pentagon, a presidential retreat invisible on its own park maps, labs working with civilization-ending pathogens, an island the Army abandoned to its own bombs, asylums where hundreds of unnamed people were buried in mass graves, ghost towns you can hike through without knowing, and an island community the Chesapeake Bay swallowed whole. These places are not forbidden at random. They follow a pattern shaped by three forces. The government builds what it needs to hide, and Maryland's proximity to Washington makes it the natural vault. Institutions fail the people they promised to protect, and the ruins they leave behind become too dangerous or too shameful to reopen. And the land eventually takes back what was built on it, whether anyone is ready or not. 17 places. 3 forces. One small state that contains more secrets per square mile than most Americans will ever know. If you want to see how geography drew similar invisible lines through other states, check out one of the videos on screen, and if you have not already, subscribe.